All right. Hey, everybody. My name is Kelsey. I use they, them pronouns. I'm on the National Labor Commission, and I am a member of Atlanta DSA, and importantly, a member of United Campus Workers of Georgia, which is a wall-to-wall public sector union here in the South. Today, this webinar is hosted by DSA's National Political Education Committee, and we are going to be talking to some folks about labor organizing in the South. We have a great round of panelists today who are going to speak to their own experience organizing in the Southern labor movement. We're going to be talking about the history of the Southern labor movement, some of the unique challenges that we face, and where we're finding hope in the state of the movement today and all the cool things that are going on. Just to preface this call a little bit, as many of you may know, it's pretty difficult to organize in the South. We have a lot of restrictive anti-worker labor laws down here, like bans on public sector collective bargaining. We have right to work laws, at-will employment, and in general, there's a lot of anti-union sentiment and misinformation that we have to deal with. Oftentimes, the first step of organizing a workplace in the South involves explaining what a union is in the first place. A lot of the things that we have to deal with down here are a little different than you might experience in places like New York or Chicago. And so we're gonna dig a little bit into that today. We have seen a lot of, exciting developments in the South in recent years. I know down here in Atlanta, there's cool stuff going on, every week. There's some Amazon rally or Starbucks workers are on strike. We saw Chattanooga auto workers win one of the first union elections in decades in Chattanooga this past summer. Really cool stuff going on. The Bessemer plant in Alabama unionizing. CWA this summer launched the longest telecom strike in Southern history, I believe. So there's a lot of cool stuff to be excited about. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our panelists and let them say a little bit about themselves and what they do in the labor movement, and I guess their observations on kind of where we're at right now. What is their analysis of the current state of the Southern labor movement? And then we're going to move on after that to a few other topics, like what is the role of pro-worker legislation in building labor movement in the South? What is the role that segregation and racism has played throughout history, and what we're looking ahead for the Trump administration. So first, I'll give everybody about 2-3 minutes to introduce themselves, and again, just introduce who you are and kind of what are your observations in a minute-long quip of where the Southern labor movement is at right now. So we have Amanda from Starbucks Workers United and Atlanta DSA, if you want to kick it off.
Sure. Thanks for being here, y'all. My name's Amanda Rivera. I am a 12-year Starbucks partner. I helped organize my store in June of 2022, and we have been fighting the good fight ever since in Midtown Atlanta, holding it down during some of, the hardest union busting times during our campaign. So I also joined DSA because DSA has always shown up for Starbucks workers in Atlanta. From my experience, they've just really great group of people and helped me grow as an organizer for sure. What I see going on in the South, I'm really excited. It's really crazy. It's, things that we didn't think would happen are happening. Amazon is building, a strong union. The Teamsters are taking over Delta, not just the Teamsters, I am, and the Flight Attendants Union, AFA. And we're taking on Starbucks, which I guess for whatever reason I didn't realize was the second largest like fast food company in the world. And so it's crazy. But I think that what happens in the South is a really honest gauge of what labor is in America. And if we win the South, we can win everywhere. And so that's one thing that really drives me is to just, even when I'm not feeling great, even when it's not, my day, you go talk to a worker, you help relate to what's going on and help them understand that the only way we're going to get through is together. And so it's just an honor to be here. And yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Amanda. I'll pass it to Sherman Henry next with Jobs with Justice.
Yes, thank you. Um, part of, I guess, my analysis is I come from a public sector union, ASME in South Florida, Miami. I managed that union for about 24 years. I led the union, started out as a ranking file school custodian and worked my way up. Uh, right now, the National Jobs with Justice is instituting a labor center here in the Atlanta area at Clark Atlanta University. So I'm the director of the Advancing Black Strategists initiative, which is the labor center. Uh, some of the excitement is that we're grooming Black strategists, which is kind of the target uh, population for us and thinking through how Black workers have been disenfranchised over the years. And so part of our initial round of success is the Bluebird campaign, working with the steel workers here in Fort Valley, Georgia, which we won that campaign. We put one of our fellows out there to assist with organizing a workforce that was about 90% African American. And as we're now having some success, we look at what just happened with the New Flyers campaign, where we now have community benefits agreements being presented as an alternative to traditional bargaining, and having a perspective of encouraging more international unions to rethink reinvesting in the South. For a while, folks have kind of abandoned the South because of the racism and the restrictive laws and the preemption from a lot of the governors and making it harder, even when there's a show of interest, especially in the public sector, for unionizing, they create legislation that discourage any employer that needs state funding for recognizing the union. And so the travel for us and the organizing campaign is really getting back into the community, educating folks, because as you mentioned earlier, uh, the union density is so low and the politics has been so fierce over the year that the fear mongering and the Southern strategy is still well and alive for us in the South. So as we kind of reimagine the South and what does an industrial democracy look like, it starts really with grassroots organizing. And if we continue to engage these national unions and these state federations, AFL-CIOs, that grassroots organizing, training would essentially help us overcome some of the hurdles as we're dealing with the backlash of the mega movement. So I'm excited that so many folks are here. And all week, as you know, we was in the meeting earlier, folks are showing up and showing the interest. And as we kind of think historically, a new generation of folks, workers are saying we're not going to take it, whether it's Starbucks, the Waffle House campaign we're doing research on now, trying to organize the Waffle House restaurants here in the Atlanta area. So I feel like there's a lot of promise right now and a lot of enthusiasm for folks wanting to overcome some of the burdens that the law restrict us on, but folks are taking their own livelihood in their hand in this post COVID epidemic when we dealt with the a national resignation from jobs, quitting jobs. So now folks are now saying, we're not going to quit. We're just going to make these jobs better.
Thank you so much, Sherman. Yeah, the disinvestment of unions from the South is one more hurdle that we're having to deal with, but we're bringing them back. So I'll pass it over to Ashaki next.
All right, greetings, everybody. Can you hear me pretty
Yes.
well? All right. Just wanted to begin by saying thank you for having us. My name is Ashaki Benta, and I'm a kind of a lifelong organizer and participant in the Black Freedom Movement, and particularly on the questions of organizing Black workers, particularly, but all workers in general, but especially here in the South. I'm a member of Black Workers for Justice, an organization that's been tackling this problem for a good 40 years now, having been formed in North Carolina in 1981, 82, in there, around in there. And, we've been dealing with, every question imaginable, but our vision has been understanding the importance of the Black working class, particularly in the South, and the identity of the classes in terms of the national question being a factor that has to be understood, as well as the class question, and the role that Black workers play in this region, and the role that this region plays in the ongoing, day-to-day mechanisms of capitalism, and how we have to, deal with and address that. So I really appreciate Sister Amanda and Brother Sherman's, comments in terms of the work that they've been doing over so many years, and all of us really. So our outlook has been that there's a need to build a type of new trade unionism in the South, and that when you understand the South, it's structured politically and economically against unions, and has an oppressive framework, to keep all sectors of the working class kind of under oppression, or under very restricted impact. So we have to learn and study and understand what all of those mechanisms are. And then, since we're, fighting a capitalist system, it's very, very important to look at the question of power, and how do we gain power, and how do we build it, and how do we use it in the best interests of oppressed people in this country. So there's a lot, that we're confronted with. So the question of new trade unionism, which we characterize as social movement unionism, as opposed to business unionism, that became a characterization of the national trade union movement in this country after the 30s, 40s, and 50s of struggle, and so that's very important. And also that the Black freedom movement itself, have developed much more class consciousness and understanding, the nature of the Black community. And I'll close by saying that the South plays a really important role in the not only in U.S. capitalism, but in the world capitalist system, the imperialist system. There's a lot of foreign direct investment, and there's reinvestment taking place now in the South with different industries moving into the region. And so it's very important for us to have, a good analysis of these things, and, to be building, very, very in a focused way. So part of our task has been, to try to help build, infrastructure throughout, to try to help build on the shop floor. That's very, very important, that we understand our part of the power equation is building organization in the workplace, in both the public and private sector, and utilizing everything that we can, to help us be able to do that. So that's been, part of our mission. My background is also, I'm a retired union organizer, and I spent the last 11 years of my work life working for UE, United Electrical Workers, but also working for other I've worked with other unions as well, in the past. So I don't know what else I can remember right now, um, but anyway, glad to be here and glad to be a part of this discussion tonight. I'm also a part of the coordinating committee of Southern Workers Assembly. That's been part of our work that we helped to initiate over the years, and other aspects of both the labor movement and the Black freedom movement. So I'll stop there, and I look forward to this discussion tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And then we'll segue over into Ben.
Yeah. Hey, all. Yeah, first of all, thanks so much to DSA for organizing this discussion and inviting us to be a part of it. My name is Ben. I live in Durham, North Carolina, and I'm part of the Southern Workers Assembly. My introduction to the labor movement in the South was in 2006 when the Raleigh sanitation workers went out on a 2-day illegal wildcat strike to protest, against, poor working conditions, low pay, after, going to the city manager and the city council with demands and not being heard. Workers, primarily Black workers, took matters into their own hands and really seeing the power, that workers have. I mean, immediately the city was bending over backwards to come out to the yard, to ride around in the sanitation trucks. And so it was really, really showed the power that the working class has when we take action together. And, since then, I've been a part of a variety of different other kind of labor organizing. I've worked on the Fight for 15 for a number of years in North Carolina. And I've been in this role with the Southern Workers Assembly for the last 2 years or so, although, I've been a part of the organization more or less since it was founded 12 years ago. And just quickly, our work is really about building the type of infrastructure that Ashaki was speaking to. I think, as others have mentioned, the South has long been neglected and dismissed by the rest of the labor movement to the detriment of workers and working class communities here first and foremost, but on the rest of the working class movement in this country, because the South, because of the structural racism, the low wages, all the anti-labor and other anti-worker laws that they're passing against abortion restrictions, against trans people, attacks on public education. I mean, you name it, the South is a testing ground for all this reactionary legislation that then gets shipped out across the country. So I think, to your question, about what's kind of exciting about this moment or what kind of a general observation is that, I think within the last couple of years, there's been much more of a recognition, across the board in the labor and other parts of the social movements about the need to build working class organization and power in the South. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, the Black Lives Matter movement, the response to the COVID pandemic, I think the struggle in Bessemer, Alabama by Amazon workers during the pandemic that, motivated, dozens of solidarity actions across the country, that's now several years later, as you mentioned, the UAW not only winning the election after, 10 years at the Volkswagen plant in Chattanooga, but going on the offensive and saying, we're going to not just organize, this auto plant or that place, but we're going to take on all of the non-union automakers in the South. And so really putting that challenge out. In addition, of course, to Starbucks workers, Amazon workers, public sector workers, childcare workers, education, across the board, workers are in motion in a way. And I think that there's some real opportunities. I think the real challenge is how do we intervene and, make interventions in this moment across the board that can take advantage of some of those changing conditions. And in spite of, the many, many attacks that are, sure to come down from the Trump administration and the terrain that will become even more difficult than it is. I think Southern workers in particular have a long and proud history of fighting back and organizing and resisting in the midst of all kinds of hospitable or inhospitable conditions. And so I think, that, really kind of, recalling those kinds of traditions in the moment that we're facing, I think will be a real challenge, for us to intervene as a movement.
Thank you, Ben. Really great observations from everybody. Getting excited about the rest of our conversation. I'm coughing a little bit, so so our first, we kind of already touched on a little bit of this, but I was hoping people could speak to what are some of the challenges and disadvantages that we face here organizing labor in the South, from restrictive labor laws to the history of institutional racism and segregation. Many of these laws that we're dealing with today stem from the Jim Crow era. And, you know, there's misinformation, disinformation about what unions are, what our legal rights are. So I was hoping we could spend a couple minutes just laying out what are those challenges and, you know, what are our strategies to overcome them? What have we seen work? So if anybody wants to jump in, go for it.
Well, this is Sherman. I think we have to really think through union density and target industries. The laws are what they are, but as we know, especially in places like Florida, when you do community organizing that leads to something that's going to be impactful, like the Fight for 15, raising the minimum wage in Florida, in spite of DeSantis' challenges, had at least created an awareness that people can have power that would do things that the legislators wouldn't do to eradicate poverty, by increasing wages and hopefully making working conditions better. I think investing in education, which is our strategy now, and looking at industrial democracy where folks don't have voice, and teaching them what voice means, and how that voice can really transform into some type of action. Uh, we we witnessed it at the Bluebird campaign. We're now uh, doing work with the Waffle House workers who are now realizing that they have a level of power. And once they recognize they have a level of power, they start to self-actualize and become motivated and changing the dynamics of what is economic forces that stacked against them, but more specifically, they get to know their coworkers in their own communities. So when we move from the boardrooms and just traditional collective bargaining, we then have a reimagination of what's possible. In a similar way, we seen and experienced that with the New Flyers campaign, where there's this new community benefits agreement. And so educating folks in general, I think, about what they can do in spite of these horrendous laws would start to give fuel to changing these conditions. In a way, we also witnessed Missouri, right? Just passed a progressive minimum wage increase. Although we lost the political elections, they, meaning the people, recognized that they needed to do something that their legislators and elected officials would not do. And there's a rich history in the living wage campaigns that I think needs to become more energized again, in some of these southern states where we know that they're not going to increase minimum wage. We know that they're going to attack unions, and we know that they want to keep union density low. But educating folks and moving beyond the stigma of unions here in the South, because they've done a good job, meaning those who want oppressive wages and anti-union laws have done a good job. So we now have to counter that with grassroots organizing, and it starts with really educating some of the folks who may be interested in becoming change agents. That's kind of like a starting point.
Jump in whoever wants to go next, but I'll 100% second. Education is the first step. And I think that, you know, having these restrictive laws, it does have this chilling effect. But really it's the misinformation that, you know, stops people from taking any steps towards a union. I know a lot of folks, everyone in my family works for the public sector. So I didn't grow up knowing anything about unions. And, you know, something that's always stuck with me is one of the first Starbuckses that organized in Atlanta. the way that they started the organizing education conversation on the shop floor was by asking where somebody went to high school. And if they said New York, New Jersey, they'd move forward with the union conversation. And if they said somewhere in Metro Atlanta, they would start with what is a union 101. And, you know, it's knowledge first, and then we can talk action.
Because the knowledge
Well,
is empowerment. So that's really, and it's a individual engagement, right? Informal or formal education. So once folks start to, I believe, take ownership and become curious about what can happen, it creates a consciousness and an awareness that these policies and these systems are not designed for me. The South is going to always put industry over individual communities. So that's our role. And as you know, we're now also establishing an Atlanta JWJ chapter to kind of fill a void between what's going to happen on the college campus and what's going to happen in the community. So I'll shut up now.
Go ahead, Shaki.
no problem. I would say one of our biggest challenges is to to try to build organization in the workplace, despite the laws and everything that work against it. Yet there are structural laws in the private sector. Of course, you have the right to work laws or restrictions on the ability of unions to consolidate. And in the public sector, of course, you have the lack of any kind of framework for collective bargaining rights in a few states, or at least in North Carolina still. While a lot of the southern states don't really have a collective bargaining framework for the public sector, in North Carolina, there's an actual law on the books prohibiting public sector, and Virginia was one of those states as well, but it's recently changed to allow collective bargaining. But then, the balance of forces and the power that you need to, force legislatures to respond and to deal with that is part of the challenge. But despite those limitations, a lot of organizing can take place in the workplace, and building that unity from organizing in the workplace to the community and through other kind of mechanisms of infrastructure is very important. And so we don't know what's coming down the pike with Trumpism coming in, even more ferocious than it was the first time around. But I think organization and our own program of communications, because communication right now is being dominated by the right, and they're utilizing every format out there. So I think it's going to be important for all of the national movements and the trade unions for us to rebuild our own mechanisms of communication that can happen, whether the internet is available or not, because we know they'll cut those off, or if cell phones are available or not. We've seen a couple of instances under Trump's first term, the whole Northeast cell phone mechanism was shut down. They never explained why. I don't know if you guys remember that, but so some of the electronics, digital framework can, we don't have control over that, but there are things that we can have control over. So our own systems of communication that is not just dependent. I'm not saying we shouldn't utilize, digital communication. We should utilize it all. I believe in that. Any advances that take place, let's, reshape them to our benefit. But when we don't have control over those mechanisms, we got to take that into consideration. So I think the question of organization and communication, establishing those frameworks in the next few years is going to be very important. Organization itself, I'll close by saying this, is a framework for communication, because it generates consciousness and understanding, and allows information to get out among forces. So the first step is really getting organized, both in the community, but definitely in the workplace, places that we're talking about. It's very, very important to have that and to have linkages between the various industries and various workplaces where we are. So I'll close on that, but
thank you. And Amanda and Ben, if you want to jump in, I'll go ahead and drop the next question, but feel free to kind of combine answers because there's a lot of overlap here. So our next question, I think Ben might want to answer this one. Based on your personal observations, where do you see the most energy for organizing in the South right now? From who, in what sectors, what industries, what sectors and industries should we strategically be paying attention to? And what do you think might be missing from our current strategy? So I'll go ahead and pass that one over to Ben.
Yeah, just on the previous question, and then I'll jump into that one. I mean, totally agree with what Sherman and Ashaki were saying. I mean, part of our work is that, we are developing workers' assemblies in cities across the South, and they're essentially networks that bring together rank and filers from across workplaces to coordinate, to, share lessons, to build solidarity, and also to reach out to and engage unorganized workers and go to major employers in different cities across the region and distribute agitational leaflets and talk to workers, make contacts to then support, workers in an expanding number of workplaces to take the first steps to build committees. And, I think, in some ways this was what you were speaking to, Kelsey, about the Starbucks organizing, but, a lot of times we'll encounter workers and folks think that, unions are illegal, it's illegal to join unions. So, I think just that, education on the one hand, but also just kind of, I think, really promoting and elevating the different struggles that are happening and the ways that workers are, organizing across the region, and spreading that more. I mean, I think there's been a lot of, social media and things like that that's great and helps to popularize, different ways that workers can organize and take collective action and fight back. But really a concerted effort by the labor movement and the rest of the left to, broaden that out and spread it and bring it into an increasing number of workplaces, because ultimately the struggle, and learning through struggle and practice is the best teacher. And so I think, having that kind of, again, the kind of question of infrastructure to be able to do that, and to have that kind of a perspective where we are actively and proactively kind of going to unorganized workers, and uplifting different struggles and showing how, the issues that workers are facing here are connected and the same issues that workers are fighting back against over here, and really, promoting that sense of a movement and that there are avenues to fight. As far as the sectors that are in motion, I mean, I think a lot of folks spoke to it. I think in the intros, I think across the board, a lot of sectors are in motion. And I think something that's been particularly important about this period is just the kind of very public and very public strikes that have been taking place, whether it's the UAW. I mean, the ILA, recently went on strike for the first time since 1977 in a 3-day strike. I mean, the Union of Southern Service Workers, I think, has been really promoting a different, in a similar way to the Southern Workers Assembly's perspective on organizing, building organization of workers across workplaces engaged in collective action and promoting a broader movement approach to organizing in workplaces rather than, a workplace by workplace kind of approach. As well as, I think the service sector in general, there's a lot of activity from USSW. There's an organization, the Asheville Food and Beverage Workers United, that's a part of the Southern Workers Assembly that similarly kind of builds across the sector to engage workers in collective action around common demands. So I think there's a lot of momentum. And, of course, as mentioned, the UAW drive, I think, is really animating and a lot of, workers to start thinking about, and hopefully other unions to start thinking about the real need to build organization in the region. As far as this question of what's missing, I mean, I think that our view is that there's some pretty profound and pretty significant economic changes that are happening across the region. It's a process that, began, after the economic crisis in the 2010s. It's been dramatically accelerated with, all kinds of manufacturing of really critical parts of, different parts of the economy relocating to the South. I think, I don't know if this statistic is totally right, but I think it's something along the lines of, in the last year, 2/3 of new investment into manufacturing has been in the South. And of course, there's hundreds of billions of dollars in capital that's being invested in huge facilities to produce everything from, green energy stuff, from electric vehicles, solar energy, all this kind of stuff, to chip manufacturing, which is, critical in this economy that's becoming more and more dependent on, different kinds of technology, military armaments, and pharmaceuticals and all kinds of data centers. Meta and Elon Musk are building data centers in Alabama and outside of Memphis. So there's all these huge, important industries that are coming to the region. And like I mentioned, really kind of ushering in some pretty serious economic changes. And so, the labor movement as a whole, I mean, not at the exclusion of other sectors, but, really kind of grappling with how these investments are going to change the region, the ramifications on other sectors, and really having a shared strategy of how we're kind of approaching and starting to build organization in manufacturing and logistics in particular across the region, I think will be increasingly important in the upcoming years.
Amazing. Amanda, go ahead.
Yeah, I am loving what everyone's talking about. Really great points. The first question that you asked, I think Sherman talked a lot about education. Within the Starbucks Workers Campaign, we are, worker-driven campaign, and we run on a motto of learn it, teach it, do it. We are working together to educate each other. And I love that, we have a lot of really young people at Starbucks, and this could be the introduction to labor for them. I'm 17, people are 17, 18, wanting to go to college, and Starbucks does offer education if you work part-time at Starbucks. So, taking the advantages that the company gives us. And then also, I mean, are they good benefits? Yeah. But also, we still want a union. So, using the platform that our union has given us, not only to, educate ourselves, but, stand up for what we believe in and not have to compromise, even though we work for a billion-dollar company. But the education aspect is so important. And I really think it's important that we just honestly talk about the fact that we're in unions and that we advocate for labor. I know a lot of times it's like, oh, Amanda's talking about it again. You're gonna get sick of hearing me talk about it, because it is so important that we talk about it and that we be annoying about it. I'm doing it for you as much as I'm doing it for myself. So yeah, that's kind of my perspective on the first question. The second question, I mean, I in Atlanta, we have a lot going on. And I know that we've talked a little bit about how, the South is facing a lot of different issues and that stunts our growth in a lot of ways. But we need to take this bullshit they put us through and use it as our advantage. We know what the shit is. We know it's bad. We know that the foundation is rotten. Let's just do everything we can and push hard and really advocate for each other, show up for each other. I really think that that's how we're going to make a difference, is just being there. And I tell people at Starbucks, like, you can grow within a union. It doesn't have to be at Starbucks forever. You could become a teacher. You could become a flight attendant. You could become an engineer. You could be in a union. Unions can be for life, and helping them understand that. So like, I'm really excited about what we're doing and how things are developing in the Starbucks campaign. But I'm also really excited for Delta being the only legacy, airline that doesn't have a union. That's crap. And to see the people show up for us at Starbucks, and I see the same people all the time from Delta. It's like they're always out on the picket line for UAW, for, you know, the bad legislation that Brian Kemp in Georgia put forth this year. I think it was SB 362, which basically takes away tax incentives when companies voluntarily recognize unions. And also, we need to just get over abiding by bad laws. Bad laws are meant to be broken, and we need to get out of our comfort zone of being like, well, we can't do anything about it. No, we need to be radical, and we need to say bad laws need to be broken. So Brian Kemp, I don't care about your law. We're going to keep organizing. um, let's see, what was the last part? Why do we think uh certain sectors are gaining more traction? No, sorry, y'all.
You're good.
What's missing?
Yeah.
I don't know. I was talking to somebody earlier about retail. You know, I mean, it would be so wonderful to see Target, Walmart, you know, all these places see that kind of happen. So hopefully we'll get to that point.
Amazing. And just to kind of touch on a few things a few people said, there's a lot of talk about just, you know, amplifying the struggles that are already going on, because you know, there's so much happening and, you know, people still don't hear about it. There's still people who don't know Starbucks is launching this nationwide campaign. And just a personal observation from Atlanta DSA, like we have all these people just like me who grew up in the South, completely unfamiliar with the labor movement and why it's important. And when Starbucks started popping off, going on strike all the time, that was the most action we'd seen in our entire lives. And, you know, that the bar is low down here. And so many DSA members would come to those picket lines and see Amanda and see, you know, all these young people screaming on strike. And they'd say, oh, I want to get a union job. I want to work at UPS. I want to go salt at Amazon. And, you know, so when you see it and you go there and you're physically on the picket line, it's an educational and a radicalizing experience. And so just, you know, bringing people, amplifying the current fights and bringing people in to that orbit goes a really long way. But anybody else want to hop on this question before we move on to the next one? Cool. And we can continue, you know, to kind of combine the answers if we want, because there's a few here. So we talked a bit about the kind of unique struggles we face down here, strategies to get out of it, move forward, what kind of industries are popping off right now. So something that comes up a lot when it comes to organizing in the South is what role do legislative efforts play? On the one hand, you know, we have like, I'm a member of United Campus Workers, and our union all across all the states with bans on public sector bargaining, we're working on legislation to make it legal. And, you know, the act of doing that is an educational experience. And, you know, through these legislative efforts, I've been able to bring a lot of people into my union and educate teachers about their rights and how they can get involved in the teachers union. And, you know, the concept of pre-majority organizing and how can we actually still win things even if there's no legal contract, because we really don't want people to just be paralyzed thinking they can do nothing. So I guess let's take a minute to look at, you know, how do we balance these legislative efforts with other forms of organizing? What kind of legislative reforms should we be pushing for? And you know, how do we get out of this mentality that it's just a waiting game for these things to become legal? Because, you know, red for ed, all these red states, teachers went on strikes and won huge gains. So, you know, let's talk about that a little bit. If anybody wants to jump in there.
Well, guess I could share some thoughts on this one. I think the question of the working with legislatures and attempting to, move them in the right direction is so much dependent on the power, the base that's coming to them and its strength, and how much it's able to put pressure, on elected officials to respond. And we talked about in SWA sometime in some of our study groups or discussion groups, that laws in labor came about as a result of struggle on the shop floor. They didn't create laws to make the struggle happen. The struggle happened and forced elected officials to have to create laws in order to try to respond to and gain some control over what was going on. There are thousands of strikes and shop floor actions, and all of these things force the labor movement to have to, force the country to have to, respond and establish some mechanisms, for labor to be able to assert, gain collective bargaining and, assert rights on the job and have them recognized. So it's very, very important that that we build a strong base. Looking at the emergence of the right over all of these years, and you think back to something like the Tea Party and this group and that group that they had over all those years, that why is someone like an odious figure like Trump able to continue to go on and on and on? It's because there's a base, a force that he represents or reflects, that's pushing in a certain direction, that gives him the life that he has, and so that's the level of organization has reached a pretty high status on the right, but we haven't reached quite that level on the left in terms of our depth into the communities and our communities and our people, how we're electing officials and where they are. We haven't had that level of development that I think is needed. So once we have that base, or as we try to build that base that brings pressure to these elected officials, then I think it begins to force them to have to address the questions that we're raising. We have to put demands in front of them and fight for those demands, educate them, but not expect things to come from them to us. It needs to go from us to the elected officials, pushing them to reflect what the base and community of people are saying they want and need. And so to me, that's very much a part of the approach. And sometimes in the labor movement, it's been the opposite, that we're investing in electing individuals in certain constituencies to different posts in office. And these elections are important. I'm not saying they aren't, but that as a strategy for labor, when we move away from our base of power and taking action and being able to demonstrate and educate in terms of what our conditions are, what we want, how we feel these challenges need to be resolved, that's very important, that we have that understanding and move from that position of strength, our own strength, to challenge these elected officials and to propose to remove these backward laws or to create new law that supports our work. So those are some of the thoughts I have on how do we deal with elected officials and legislation.
Amazing. I'll pass it to Amanda next.
Yeah, I think the key to everything we do is community, and who knows community better than the people who are out there, bringing it together. We do need to be building a strong base, and then we need to be running people that are in the community. We need to rally behind them and help them get elected, because the government is not going to save us. The legislature is not going to save us. It's us that's going to save us. And until we can, really get people in office that are going to represent us, that aren't going to sell out to big business, we need to just be building our bases and just really meeting people where they are, because I think even if we see ourselves on the left and we see ourselves as progressive, we're all going through the same thing. And helping people understand and really working your argument around where they are at the moment and helping them see, you know, how we can stand together. And it's not about being on the right or left. It's like we need to really just understand that we're all suffering and together we can all have better. Um, but in the Atlanta DSA, I'm so proud that we worked with one of our members, and he ran, and he's the first socialist to ever get into office in Georgia. And so, this is the beginning of a really beautiful thing in the state of Georgia. Um, and that was, because Gabe showed up at Starbucks strikes, and he showed up at, UAW strikes, and he showed up, at the airport. And I mean, we are already in the community. We are the people that know what the community needs because we are that community. So just, um, building power and taking over.
Shout out to Gabriel Sanchez. And I'll pass it over to Ben next.
Yeah, no, I agree a lot with what Shaki and Amanda said. Yeah, I mean, I think we should utilize every arena of struggle that we have. And like you said, Kelsey, just that work of kind of talking about the legislation, what it is, why it exists, who has the power to change it, that in itself can be educational. I mean, I think it's also, these legislative or kind of policy fights can offer opportunities, both to for workers, initial committee building efforts, or workers who are just kind of coming into organizing in the workplace. It can be an environment that is a little bit, somewhat less intimidating to take action and to kind of see that connection between struggles. I mean, I think an example is that, yeah, here in North Carolina, there's been a coalition that SWA and some of the different unions that we work with in assemblies and other work across the state have been building around heat safety, with OSHA kind of putting forward some new guidelines around heat safety. And so it's brought together, public workers, service workers, farm workers, workers from a variety of different warehouse workers and logistics workers. Workers, heat is a pretty universal issue that workers in a variety of different industries face. And so, there were actions just this past week at government sites as well as workplaces that brought together workers from various different workplaces that were speaking to their own specific ways that they've dealt with heat on the job, but connecting it together and really helping to kind of start to solidify kind of a more coordinated, broader movement that's not limited to a workplace or even just a sector, but is seeing kind of how these issues affect the working class as a whole, and really kind of giving some identity and really raising that kind of consciousness about the connections between workplaces and the fights that we're facing and the similar conditions. I think, like Ashaki said, though, I mean, ultimately, legislative victories aren't won because of the benevolence of politicians. It's won because of the power that we're able to build and exercise. And so building an organization in the shop floor and taking actions in workplaces, obviously is a critical part of eventually winning, legislative victories. That being, I think another, finally, just an important thing too, particularly with the period that we're going into, and someone put in the chat, I think a good illustration of this is that, more and more, the labor movement, broadly speaking, I mean, the unions, but also the left and other progressive organizations, need to be taking action and kind of really centering, building around demands and fights that affect the entirety of the working class beyond just, individual, their membership in, this workplace or that workplace. I mean, the thing somebody put in here, Medicare for all, that NNU and UE and others, public ownership of the rails, and especially now it's like solidarity with migrant workers, defending trans youth and trans workers from various attacks. All the different communities and sections of the working class that are going to be under attack under this administration. And I think one, final thing too that's been very encouraging towards this end is, the development of the National Network for a Ceasefire, You know, the initiative of UE, UAW, I think SBWU has been involved in that, other, you know, major unions, which is, I think, a real departure from the way that unions have engaged or not engaged in, you know, the anti-imperialist struggles previously, either saying nothing or worse, giving cover to it. And so, you know, I think all these developments taken together are, you know, a positive sign. But, you know, again, particularly with the period coming up, I think the more that the labor movement can be taking on these fights that, you know, affect the conditions for the entirety of the working class is going to be critical.
Awesome. And I'll pass it to Sherman.
Sure, I'll won't be long, but as we kind of think through workers' rights, right? Whether they're in the union now, or hope to join the union. So one of the projects that we also I'm leading is like workforce development conversation. We recently passed a resolution with the city of Atlanta just about what is good jobs and what jobs are being created and the quality of those jobs. Right now, it's not enforceable as far as unionization, things of that nature, but it gets the community into a conversation about the quality of jobs that's being created, the resources that federal government and state governments are pouring into these various initiatives, like the federal workforce program. We're not talking about it, but they're getting ready to renew and reauthorize several millions of dollars coming to these states about workforce development. And in those boards, they're controlled by corporate people. And so I think when ordinary citizens start to say, well, no, yes, we want to create jobs, but we want to organize these jobs in a way that they have a livable wage, that they have sick leave, and they have the type of training that does not discriminate against like a union apprenticeship program, right? And so some of us in the community, some of the community-based groups are now starting pre-apprenticeship programs and collaborating with union apprenticeship programs to kind of lift up the voices of what have been the anti-union sentiment through educating and transforming the conversation to these are the kind of jobs we want in the community. And if the politicians are now perpetuating these jobs, then we know that they don't have the community at heart. And so we're snatching that voice away or that issue or repackaging that issue to kind of get those groups organized. And I think once we start to get folks to kind of think out of the box, out of the kind of like we don't have power. Look at those government resources or those components of the government, like the federal workforce, public workforce system, and say, well, look, we're going to start to kind of put stress on those folks. We're going to start to kind of organize in the community, and then we're going to have a different demand. And even when the local boards, like here in Atlanta, don't necessarily have the autonomy to kind of move real tangible rights forward just because of the state laws here. But the community then gets involved and say, well, no, 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 these are tax dollars, and we should have a voice on how our tax dollars are spent and what jobs we're creating. In that committee, we've been operating for at least a year, and we're getting some traction, but we don't have enough community awareness. So in addition to kind of like we know that the legislative is rigged. We know committees in the legislative process are already stacked against us. But these other little agencies or resources that the government control that we have not tapped into. And I think once we give workers voice in those agencies, and then they start to see what the power of collective action is, and then we believe that it'll transform some of the bigger challenges we have here about changing state law. So we're organizing in that way, and so far we're getting a substantial amount of folks interested in it, especially these folks who want to do apprenticeship programs now, and then saying, well, hey, we want some of those dollars too. So those are just a couple of examples of things that we're actually working on here in the South that seems to be kind of giving us some momentum with educating people and at least getting the community engaged. Whether they have a collective bargaining agreement with a union or not, these are resources and legislative policies dictate how those resources are spent. And oftentimes it has an anti-union sentiment on those folks who are running them. So we just go in there and not just a public elected, but let's get in here in some of these worker right boards and take those over.
Unmute. Yeah, I'd love to talk more with Atlanta people about how to use these kind of city structures for the future. We can scheme a bit. So I'll combine these last two questions a little bit, and we can kind of do the thing where you can answer which parts you want. So first we've got we've touched on this a little bit, but so many of these anti-worker laws and sentiments do stem from the legacy of racism and segregation in the South. So many of these laws were passed in the first place to block interracial solidarity on the shop floor. So how does this racism, bigotry, even today anti-immigrant sentiment play into how does it impact building power on the shop floor today, and on the legislative side as well. And then our second question is with the incoming Trump administration, how should Southern labor organizers prepare? What should we expect? How can we fight back? What do we think the impacts of the Trump administration will be on things like the NLRB and other potential laws that could pass? I know it's a lot to think about, but
Could you repeat that first question?
Oh, sure. Yeah. First question is about kind of the legacy of systemic racism in the South and how that still shows up in the labor movement today, and how it's still a challenge that we're dealing with. How do we think that shows up today? So whoever wants to jump in, go for it.
We continue to see the recycling of racism and discriminating against certain underrepresented communities. So for an example, it was discussed here that we are seeing emerging markets like the EV market here in the South. And we know the folks who could use those jobs because of high unemployment are not always at the table. We recently hosted the current Secretary of Labor to talk about what is federal government role in making sure those jobs have some equity. So, they got the Justice 40 campaign, and even on the Bluebird campaign, one of the things that the Biden-Harris administration did was through the grants that they gave Bluebird as a company to kind of start this whole EV market. It came with union neutrality on that campaign. And so as we kind of think through the systemic barriers to organizing, we also have to look at the systemic barriers of discrimination and segregation in the workplace. And if we now, as unionists, start to make this part of our acts of those who seek to kind of overturn these bad policies and practice and join in a more progressive view of what public policies can be and how workers' rights have been denied in the South because of the wage suppression and the low wages and the corporate Southern strategy. So the Trump administration will probably remove a lot of the progressive policies that we've experienced in the Biden-Harris administration, such as the Justice 40, or investing in these companies and making sure that there's some equity in how they target communities of workers. Thus, it interacts back into what I was saying earlier, the workforce development system, or in the Jobs to Move America community benefits agreement. Those issues were addressed, and the community bought into it, and then they move forward, and they're exercising a certain right to challenge companies' bad practices. And part of that agreement is it's a final and binding arbitration. So they're not going through the traditional routes of courts that we know are stacked against us anyhow, because the courts are moving more toward conservative interpretation of law and eliminating, quite frankly, since the Brown versus Board of Education have eliminated a lot of those gains from the civil rights movement. So we see it every day, but we're not having a discussion about the impact of these laws because certain other groups are saying, well, hey, we're being discriminated against now, which is not really the case. But again, not to deny folks' feelings, we want to just have a real analysis and a conversation about what is the reality in these laws and how the current interpretation or the current policies continue to recycle the poverty in your neighborhoods too. And we're doing a lot more research on it. And that's one way that we're going to interrogate uh, and promote for a new public policy that would ultimately, we hope, address some of the systemic racism that you're talking about and what we heard happening throughout this last presidential campaign.
Anybody want to jump in next on either the systemic racism or the Trump question?
Well, I'll make a couple of more comments, I guess, quickly. Obviously, racism and national oppression against, Black and brown people in particular, or, all oppressed nationalities in this country is alive and well and kicking quite strongly. And has, increasingly taken on an ominous edge to it in these years, such that if you're a Black, brown, Asian, or indigenous person, you're the climate and the atmosphere is very threatening. It's very negative. Like we just saw some so-called white man in New York on the subway choked a young Black man, to death, and they acquitted him after he had done this. Whereas supposedly the young man was had mental illness. But I think that what causes mental illness is not having a job and not having a home and not having sufficient income to survive. That's what causes some mental illness of people that otherwise would may not have those kinds of problems. But it's the targeting and the climate of a threatening kind of thing that we're seeing. The whole intimidation of we're going to deport, have a immigration, deport millions of brown people, from America that don't have the right to be here. So we see all of this stuff happening around us that's targets oppressed national communities in this country. So but there again, the question of how do you resist it? And the greatest weapon that any oppressed people have is organization. I can't stress that enough. Getting organized and having demands and having a vision about what direction you're wanting to take, to create a better life for your family and your community. These things are just vitally important. And I think that they've got all kind of insidious plans to undermine labor in this period, or if labor is recognized, to limit what the scope of trade unions are dealing with. This Project 2025 has been a great, outlined a number of things that they're planning to do that to undermine particularly unions and to make sure that the South is not organized, and to limit the ability of any unions to be a power base from which to, struggle against the direction that the country is going in. And they're doing it in a way, I'm closing on this, they're doing it in a way that, particularly will appeal to white workers and the white middle class. And that is by, suggesting that in order to rebuild the family and to support, making strong, whole, heterosexual families or patriarchal families, again, is going to be important that, the man be the head of the household and be bringing in the income and, all this stuff. And it's, all about just strengthening the family and, the woman beginning to play her role again and all this stuff. They're they're capturing what they're trying to do, in that kind of a light, which, is appealing to, this Christian nationalism that they've been using as their kind of ideological gateway into, the homes of, millions of people. So, yeah, so, we can expect some hard times to come, but, I don't want us to be mired in fear. We want to be strengthened by our unity and our level of organization and our clarity of demands and representing the interest of the oppressed and, fighting from that perspective. And we can beat them and we can win. So I'm going to stop there. Other people may.
I'd also like to think that both the left and labor movements are much more organized than they were the first time Trump won. So that makes me feel good. I'll pass it to Amanda next.
Absolutely. I'm so much happier now that we have our union than I was before. I feel like we've got the momentum. It's going to take a lot to stop us. But I think one thing that I think about often is that as a person in a union pushing for progress, we have to be the example that we talk about. We can talk a lot, and I do talk a lot. But at the end of the day, I think it's really important that we show what we're talking about. We do mutual aid, we show up for each other.
But you have good stuff to say.
Yeah. Yeah, right, I know. But I think we need to be showing up for each other and be doing everything we can to help each other along, because I mean, talking is great. I love it. But action speaks louder than words. And so I think it's really important that even during the hardest times, that we show up for each other and we do what we can and we give what we can. My coworkers and I have been talking about going on strike potentially, if the company wants to, lowball us on economic proposals. And my coworker the other day was saying, you know what? I've got a bunch of canned food. I'm going to make a bunch of food if we go on strike. I'm going to show up with where it's going to be a potluck. And I'm like, yeah, let's do it. Like, let's do what we can. We don't have a lot, but together we can, have so much more. And it's like, if we just show up for each other and we participate, I think that just showing people is really what we need to do. Action is really important. My friend who is a ramp worker and organizing at Delta at Gomely, he told me that they should know who we are before we show up. Like our reputation should precede us. Like, oh, here they come. They're going to show up. They're going to fight for us. They're going to do what they can. And it's like, I think that's really what we're going to have to do during the toughest times during the Trump administration. Like, just give what we can. And I think I think that speaks louder than anything I could say.
Yeah, and I'll try to be brief just because I know we're short on time, but agree with what everyone else has said. I mean, I think that, obviously Trump is a boss, he's a billionaire, and his whole strategy is to divide the working class, which is the same way that, racism is used in the South, and elsewhere around the country, to divide workers and to undermine solidarity. I mean, that's, in many ways, Shaki was speaking about the ban on public sector collective bargaining. I mean, its origins is really during the, the Jim Crow era, when Black workers in particular were organizing, but there was, increasing solidarity between Black and white workers to organize in the public sector. And, that it shows how threatening, that solidarity is, because they know that when we're united, we're the many and they're the few. And so, I think that in addition to what others have said about the climate under Trump, I mean, I think it's also it's really gives a signal to the bosses and the ruling class to kind of to go on the offensive. I mean, I think that, we see that in a lot of ways already, where, right after Trump's election, Wall Street, notched record after record, for several weeks, on all the major indices. I was reading an article in Labor Notes just before this call from Vince Ramos in Arkansas that organizes migrant poultry workers, talking about how in the poultry plants, the bosses are already undermining, Latinos workers' rights. And there was I think something in there about, they were telling Latino workers that they couldn't use the restroom and only the white workers could use the restroom. We've heard from the ILA too, as folks may know, the strike ended after 3 days and negotiations continued and are continuing until the 15th of January. But, the posture of USMX, that's the kind of shipping conglomerate that runs the ports that the ILA negotiates with, they've, been starting to pull back on things. And, because they know the climate is changing. And I think we're going to see a lot of that in addition to all the attacks that are coming down. But, like others have said, I mean, I think, building organization and building fights and taking on fights is going to be what's going to really carry us through this period. And, even in the midst of all the challenges, that gives us an avenue to really to continue to build, on all the different struggles that have broken out over the preceding years. And that will be even more critical to, really take to the next level when Trump comes back into office in January.
Thank you, Ben. Sherman, do you want to close us out on this question?
Well, just one last comment. I think what we're also seeing through certain legislative sessions lately is this whole reemergence of child labor. And so I think as we continue to kind of organize and reimagine what the South has to be and look at the origins of child labor and poverty wages, that we have to center that in this whole conversation about industrial democracy and what type of future we want, whether Trump is in there or not, because we know his NLRB is probably going to repeal a lot of the gains that we had. There'll probably be more captive audience meetings reinstated, a lot of these companies, and more aggressive union busting tactics. But when we just think about the general public and something like child labor laws and how they're disguising them like, hey, these folks should be able to earn money to support their family. Well, part of this challenge is you're paying them peanuts. Oh, well, we want them to be trained so when they become an adult, they'll know how to provide for their family. But again, you're paying them peanuts. And so I just think we have to kind of have a common sense approach to economics and a common sense approach to the standard that we believe, and I believe it's more of us than them, would help promote a healthy democracy and a healthy economy. And exploitation has to be associated with the capitalism that we all probably, on some level, recognize that it goes back to the slavery times, right? And so, like, it's not just the folks you see; it's really the practices and the interests of how capitalism ultimately is designed to exploit folks. And so, this whole working class solidarity that we have to reimagine as well, especially here in the South, because we're really seeing the recycling, and not just the recycling because it never really went anywhere, but how they're now going back, undoing the gains of the 60s or the movement, labor movement gains when we were looking at child welfare as a issue. We were looking at poverty wages as an issue. And we know now with the amount of profits that we are seeing that's happening in these corporations, that's the pushback. And that's the education that I think we have to move forward those discussions and debunk some of what they're trying to make as policy statements about something like child labor. You know, it really, in some cases, yeah, I worked as a teenager, but at the same time, I wasn't now saying I can work 40 hours and go to high school. So we have to call a thing, and the exploitation of child labor is one area that you can see the whole movement for corporate greed and corporate dominance, and a lack of democracy. So as long as they continue to keep unionism and union density low in the South, they can then push these policies forward or undo civil rights gains, and then say to their corporate buddies, come here because you'll get cheap labor and you have less regulations. And you hear it in the rhetoric in these speeches from some of the Trump folks and the folks that, well, you guys get it. The folks that are now being appointed, you know, these guys are awful. But that's what I wanted to talk about. Like, as we're reassessing what the next administration is going to do, then look at some of these policies and these impacts of something like child labor, because we know that's being repealed and changed in southern states. So that's all.
Thank you, Sherman. Something I think about a lot on this topic is I feel like for so much of my life, you know, growing up in Georgia, you know, with all these terrible Republican governors, is like, it's felt like my whole life the right wing has led the conversation, right? And all we can do, and all liberals do, is react to whatever agenda the Republicans are putting forward. And I feel like we want to be in a position where we're leading the conversation and the narrative, and the right wing's having to react. And you know, I feel like if we're really organized and, you know, we lead with a strong, compelling message, we can back them into a corner and see
Go
how
on
they,
the offensive, huh?
yeah. Like, why are we arguing about, you know, trans kids playing sports in the state legislature? That's so stupid. We should be arguing about, you know, universal health care and, you know, free health care for trans people. Like, let's change the conversation we're having. So could talk about this all day, but I know we're getting close to time, so I want to give everybody a moment to kind of give a closing statement, you know, say what you're excited about in the Southern labor movement. Let's end on a positive note, and take a minute to plug whatever kind of thing you want to plug. If it's a union drive, if it's, you know, information about your organization or some kind of campaign going on. I'll pass it to Amanda first, because I know that Starbucks is doing some cool stuff right now.
Yeah, so thanks, Kelsey. We are gearing up to go into negotiations. The company has committed to finishing this contract by the end of the year, so that should be next week. And we are honestly going into non-union shops, talking to non-union workers and customers about what our campaign is, what we're trying to do, and just trying to get people to know what's going on, so that, you know, when we win our contract, then people will hopefully, you know, organize, and we'll build a big, strong union that will, I don't know, take on Donald Trump and all this crap that, you know, is coming towards us. But I just challenge you all to do what you can in the time that you have each day. If you are close to a Starbucks and would like to participate, I'm going to put the link right now in, actually that's not the link, sorry.
Oh, Amanda,
I'm
you're
going to
kind
put
of
the
frozen.
link in the chat. You can sign up Starbucks near you to understand can have better.
Great. I think you're a little frozen, Amanda.
Sorry.
Okay, you're good now.
But yeah, I'll put the link in the chat, and if you're near a Starbucks.
Okay, Amanda might be having some technical difficulties, but she dropped the link in the chat. I'll pass it to Sherman next.
Didn't have say he wanted to have a, he had one last thought he wanted to share.
Yeah, the only thing I really want to share is that thank you all for this platform. And so I'm excited because these type of platforms and meetings are happening on a frequent basis and they're well attended. And so it means that everybody's feeling the need to become active in some type of social justice and eradicating some of the horrible conditions here in the South. And to see that in the last 2 years or so, we've seen unions investing more in some of these unorganized industries in hopes of organizing them. So I'm very thankful for you all, and I'm very thankful for the energy that we see that the pendulum is swinging forward and getting more investments in the South to organize labor uh, unions.
Awesome. Shaki, you want to go next?
Well, my final thought is I just wanted to thank you all for hosting this discussion. I think it's been great. It's really exciting to meet, people like Sherman and Amanda and Kelsey. I don't think I knew you guys before, so it's been a real, pleasure just, hearing your thinking and the work that you're doing. So, this activity and a lot of the work that, Ben and I are engaged in and everything that we're all working on together is exciting to me. There is a spirit of hope and a vision of a new labor movement emerging out of the South, one that's prepared to challenge capital and to, fight for the rights and interests of working people and the oppressed. And I see that, coming, a lot of young people, coming forward, like Amanda mentioned, and maybe Starbucks could be their first opportunity to be in a union. So I hadn't been thinking about that, but it's a very, very good point. So, yes, please, let's stay in touch and, do some work together as we're, trying to do. So anyway, that's it. That's my vision, and I thank you all so much for inviting us, and I'm glad we were able to have this discussion tonight.
Amazing. Ben, you want to go last?
Sure, yeah, no, just to echo others, I mean, thanks again for, the invitation and the discussion. I think it's really great. And I think, we need to be building more of these ties and alliances and trying to figure out how we can coordinate and, build
Yeah.
together because, the more that we can kind of combine our experiences, our, energy, our, memberships, et cetera, the more I think we're going to be in a better position to not only fight and defend against what's coming, but identify those opportunities for offense and to build. I think just quickly, I mean, the Southern Workers Assembly, we're building workers assemblies and other networks, industrial councils to connect service industry workers, education workers, manufacturing workers, other sectors across the region, and we'd love to build and work with all of you who are here. I'm going to drop a link in the chat. If there's workers assemblies in 17 different cities across the region. If you're in a city that has an assembly, we'd love to connect you and get you plugged into the work that they're doing. If you're in a place that does not yet have a workers assembly, we'd love to hear from you and work together or find other opportunities that we can be in touch and coordinate and learn from each other in the period ahead. The other piece too is that, in light of, what many of us have touched on, tonight is that there's all these big strategic industries that are relocating to the South, and the Southern Workers Assembly right now, we're developing a program to get workers rank jobs inside of strategic industries across the region. There's a link in the chat if you're interested in talking more about what that looks like and, the different workplaces and sectors that we're kind of looking at. But, the way that we need, conscious, socialists inside of the workplace on the shop floor to be a part of the day-to-day struggles inside of the workplaces and to be part of helping to bring forward the kind of movement that can really not only build power for workers, but really bring forward a movement that can transform society. So we'd love to work with folks as much as we can. And thanks again. Solidarity, Organize the South.
Thank y'all. This has been an awesome conversation. I definitely want to stay in touch with all you guys because we're doing it in real time. We're organizing the South and we got to talk to each other more. You know, want to plug a few more things. The link was dropped in the chat, but if you're not a DSA member, we'd love for you to join. We'd love for you to get involved with this fight. You know, I'm on the National Labor Commission, and you know, we do have labor industry networks. We'd love you to get involved with the NLC, especially if you're a union member. If you want to get a rank and file job, if you want to get a job to organize, I'd love to talk with you about it. And if you are a DSA member or labor organizer in the South and you're trying to figure out how to get your local labor committee going, or what kind of stuff you can tap into, I'd love to talk with you about it. I have a lot of fun stories from our experience organizing in Atlanta. And, you know, I think that, you know, it's really important that we don't leave labor as the side issue and we really, you know, have it front and center in all of our organizing, especially here in the South. We're not going to be able to, you know, fight any of these fights without a strong labor movement. So I'm going to drop my email in the chat. Feel free to reach out. I'm very, you know, responsive. Want to thank you all so much again. This has been a super interesting conversation. I believe this recording is going to go up on YouTube later, so feel free to share it, check it out. Let's organize the South. Thank you guys. Have a good night, y'all.